Rain pounded the streets of Chicago that night, with cutting winds that made the metallic signs vibrate like ghostly whispers in the air. The streets were almost deserted, with only the distant headlights of the few cars piercing through the darkness, reflecting in puddles scattered across the uneven asphalt. Above the bridge that crossed the turbulent river, an unlikely encounter was about to change 3 lives forever. Robert Mitchell, a distinguished 72-year-old businessman, stood trembling by the bridge's railing, his silver hair dampened by the relentless rain. His weathered face bore the marks of someone who had seen too much, known too much. The contents of the manila envelope in his hands weighed heavily on his conscience. He had discovered something he wasn't supposed to know, something that could shake the foundations of one of Chicago's most prestigious corporations. Approaching him was Ethan Carter, a 34-year-old executive whose ambition had always overshadowed his conscience. His expensive suit, now soaked by the rain, clung to his athletic frame as he moved with determined steps toward the elderly man. The thunder illuminated their faces in brief flashes, revealing the tension between them. "Give me the envelope, Robert." Ethan's voice cut through the sound of the storm. "You don't understand what you're dealing with." Robert clutched the envelope tighter, his knuckles white with determination. "I understand perfectly well, Ethan. 20 years of corruption, hidden behind charitable donations and fake environmental projects. The board needs to know." What neither man noticed was the presence of a third witness to their confrontation. Max, a dark-furred stray dog, watched intently from behind a rusty container. His alert eyes took in every detail of the scene, recognizing Robert's scent from his daily walks past the animal shelter where Max often found refuge. The struggle that ensued was brief but decisive. The envelope slipped from Robert's grasp, its contents scattering in the wind like autumn leaves. As Robert reached desperately for the flying papers, he lost his balance. Max's sharp bark pierced the night as the elderly man teetered dangerously close to the edge. Without hesitation, the dog sprung into action, darting from his hiding place. Ethan, startled by the sudden appearance of the dog, stepped back. Max's powerful jaws caught the sleeve of Robert's coat just as the man began to fall, pulling him back to safety with surprising strength. The scattered documents, however, were swept away by the wind and rain, disappearing into the churning waters below. Robert sat on the wet pavement, breathing heavily, his hand resting on Max's wet fur. The dog stood protectively between him and Ethan, a low growl rumbling in his throat. Ethan backed away slowly, his face a mask of frustration and barely contained rage. "This isn't over, Robert," he warned, before disappearing into the stormy night. As the rain continued to fall, Robert looked at his unlikely savior with grateful eyes. "Thank you, boy," he whispered, his voice shaking. "You don't know where you came from, but you just saved my life." Max responded by pressing closer to the elderly man, offering warmth and comfort. A pair of headlights cut through the darkness as a pickup truck slowed to a stop nearby. Frank Harris, a middle-aged driver who had witnessed the final moments of the confrontation, stepped out into the rain. "Need some help?" he called out, already moving to assist Robert to his feet. As Frank helped Robert into his truck, with Max jumping in behind them, none of them realized that this rainy night was just the beginning. The lost documents held secrets that would unravel a web of corporate deceit. And somewhere in the city, Ethan Carter was already making plans to ensure those secrets remained buried. The 3 unlikely allies, an elderly whistleblower, a compassionate stranger, and a loyal stray dog, had no way of knowing that their lives had just become inexplicably intertwined in a story that would shake the very foundations of Chicago's corporate world. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give it a like. Tell us which city you're watching from. Let's continue. The morning after the bridge incident dawned grey and humid over Chicago. Robert Mitchell sat in Frank Harris's modest kitchen, his hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee. Max lay at his feet, ever vigilant, his dark eyes occasionally glancing at the window as if expecting trouble. The dog hadn't left Robert's side since the previous night's events. "You need to go to the police," Frank said, settling into the chair across from Robert. His kind face showed genuine concern for the elderly man he'd helped just hours before. What Ethan tried to do, that's serious business. Robert shook his head slowly, his expression heavy with worry. "It's not that simple, Frank. The documents I found, they implicate more than just Ethan. We're talking about Verde Solutions, one of the largest environmental technology companies in the Midwest. They've built their reputation on developing sustainable energy solutions, but it's all a facade." Frank leaned forward, intrigued. "What do you mean?" "For 20 years, I was their chief financial officer," Robert explained, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. "I believed in what we were doing, or what I thought we were doing. But last week, I discovered something in our digital archives. The company has been channeling funds meant for green energy projects into offshore accounts. The sustainable technology they claim to have developed, most of it doesn't exist. They've been selling dreams to investors and the public while secretly profiting from conventional energy sources." A sudden noise outside made Max's ears perk up. The dog rose quietly, moving to the window with practiced stealth. Frank drew the curtains closer, even though the morning light should have made them feel safer. "But you had proof, right? The documents that fell into the river." Robert's face showed a glimmer of hope. "Those weren't the only copies. I may have lost the physical documents, but there's a backup. Years ago, I started keeping records of everything, just in case. There's a safety deposit box at the First Municipal Bank downtown. Inside is a drive containing every transaction, every fake project, every shell company they've created." What Robert didn't know was that at that very moment, in a sleek office high above Chicago's bustling streets, Ethan Carter was not alone in his concern about the missing documents. In the chairman's office of Verde Solutions, Catherine Blackwood, the company's elegant but ruthless CEO, was already taking steps to contain the situation. "Find that safety deposit box," she instructed Ethan, her manicured fingers drumming steadily on her mahogany desk. "Whatever it takes, those files cannot become public. We've spent 2 decades building this company's reputation. I won't let one sentimental old man destroy everything we've worked for." Meanwhile, back at Frank's house, Robert was preparing to leave. He couldn't stay in one place too long, not when so much was at stake. But as he stood to go, Frank made an unexpected offer. "Stay," he said firmly, "at least for a few days. My house isn't much, but it's safer than being out there alone. Plus," he gestured to Max, who had returned to Robert's side, "I think someone would be very disappointed if you left." Robert looked down at the dog who had saved his life, feeling a surge of gratitude. Max wagged his tail gently, as if agreeing with Frank's suggestion. The elderly man hadn't realized how tired he was of running, of carrying this burden alone. "There's something else you should know," Robert said, settling back into his chair. "The corruption at Verde Solutions goes beyond just environmental fraud. 2 years ago, I found some unusual payments to local officials. I think they've been buying influence, ensuring that environmental inspections always go their way. But I could never prove it, not until now." As the morning wore on, none of them noticed the black sedan that drove slowly past Frank's house, its tinted windows concealing the observer within. The game of cat and mouse was only beginning, and the stakes were higher than any of them realized. The truth about Verde Solutions was a time bomb waiting to explode, and Robert Mitchell held the detonator. The following days brought an uneasy calm. Frank's modest 2-story house on the outskirts of Chicago had become an unexpected sanctuary for Robert and Max. The loyal dog had quickly adapted to his new temporary home, establishing a routine of patrolling the perimeter and keeping watch from various vantage points throughout the house. One morning, as Robert sat at Frank's computer reviewing old news articles about Verde Solutions, he discovered something that made his blood run cold. Catherine Blackwood's rise to power hadn't been as clean as the media portrayed. 10 years ago, she had been a relatively unknown executive when the previous CEO, Thomas Hammond, suddenly resigned due to health concerns. The official story was that Hammond had stepped down voluntarily, but Robert remembered things differently. "Frank," he called out, his voice tight with tension. "Look at this." He pointed to an old photograph accompanying the article. In it, Catherine stood alongside Hammond at a charity gala. But what caught Robert's attention was the figure in the background, a much younger Ethan Carter, already at Catherine's side. Frank leaned in, studying the image. "You think they planned it?" "Hammond's resignation. I know they did," Robert replied, his hands trembling slightly as he pulled up another window on the computer. "I found something in the archived files. The week before Hammond stepped down, there was a series of unusual transfers to an account in the Cayman Islands. The account holder's name was hidden, but I managed to trace it back to a shell company owned by Catherine's family." Max, who had been dozing nearby, suddenly lifted his head and growled softly. Seconds later, they heard a car pulling up outside. Frank moved quickly to the window, careful to stay hidden behind the curtain. A postal service van had parked across the street, but something felt off about the situation. "The regular mail doesn't come for another 3 hours, Frank whispered, his suspicion evident. Robert's instincts, honed by years in the corporate world, told him something wasn't right. He watched as a man in a postal uniform stepped out of the van, carrying what appeared to be a simple envelope. But Max's continued low growling confirmed their suspicions. This was no ordinary delivery. Just then, Robert's burner phone, purchased by Frank the day after the bridge incident, buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "The truth about Hammond is bigger than you know. Meet me at the Lakeside Diner tomorrow at 2 p.m. Come alone. M." Frank, reading the message over Robert's shoulder, shook his head. "It's obviously a trap." "Maybe," Robert agreed, "but M. It has to be Margaret Hammond, Thomas's widow. She disappeared from Chicago right after his resignation. If she's back, she must know something important." As they discussed their next move, neither man noticed that the postal van had left as quietly as it had arrived. However, Max tracked its movement with his eyes, his protective instinct on high alert. The dog had developed an uncanny ability to sense danger, and something about that van had triggered his warning system. Later that afternoon, Frank made a discovery of his own. As a former IT specialist for various small businesses, he had maintained connections in the tech world. One of his old colleagues, Sarah Chen, worked at the city's main data center. According to her, someone had been attempting to access the building's security footage from the night of the bridge incident. "They're trying to erase any evidence of what happened that night," Robert realized. "But why go to such lengths if all they wanted was to stop me from exposing the environmental fraud?" Frank's expression darkened. "Because there's more to this than fake green technology and bribed officials. The question is, how deep does this conspiracy really go?" The answer might lie with Margaret Hammond, but meeting her could be walking straight into Catherine Blackwood's carefully laid trap. Yet, as Robert looked at the text message again, he noticed something peculiar about the timing. Tomorrow at 2 p.m., exactly 10 years to the day since Thomas Hammond's suspicious resignation. Inside Verde Solutions headquarters, Catherine Blackwood stood at her office window, gazing out at the Chicago skyline. Her reflection in the glass showed no emotion as Ethan entered the room. "The package has been delivered," he reported. "And our friend at the data center confirms that all footage from that night has been secured." Catherine's lips curved into a slight smile. "Excellent. And the other matter. The diner is being prepared as we speak. If Mitchell takes the bait, we'll finally have everything under control." What neither of them knew was that at that very moment, Margaret Hammond was making preparations of her own. In a small apartment on the other side of the city, she opened a dusty safe hidden behind a false wall. Inside lay a single USB drive, one that contained the real reason behind her husband's resignation, and the dark secret that could bring down not just Verde Solutions, but an entire network of corrupt corporations and officials. Chapter 4. Dangerous Truths. The Lakeside Diner stood like a time capsule from the 1950s, its neon sign flickering weakly in the grey afternoon light. Robert sat in a corner booth, his hands wrapped around a cooling cup of coffee. Despite Frank's protests, he had come to meet Margaret Hammond, but he hadn't come unprepared or alone. Frank sat at the counter, pretending to read a newspaper, while Max waited vigilantly in Frank's truck parked across the street, his dark eyes fixed on the diner's entrance. The bell above the door chimed as a woman in her early 60s entered. Margaret Hammond had aged gracefully, her silver hair pulled back in an elegant bun, but her eyes carried the weight of someone who had seen too much. She slid into the booth across from Robert without a word, placing a leather handbag carefully on the seat beside her. "I wasn't sure you'd come," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "They're watching, you know, they always are." Robert leaned forward slightly. "Why now, Margaret? After 10 years of silence, why reach out?" She smiled sadly, pulling a small manila envelope from her bag. "Because of this. Thomas didn't just step down from Verde Solutions. He was forced out because he discovered something that went far beyond environmental fraud." As she spoke, neither of them noticed the black sedan that pulled up outside the diner, or the way Max's ears suddenly perked up in the truck. The dog's instincts were razor sharp, sensing the approaching danger before anyone else. "Verde Solutions was never just about green energy," Margaret continued, sliding the envelope across the table. "It was a front for something much bigger. The company's real business was data, collecting and selling information about every major corporation and government contract in the Midwest. The environmental projects were just a cover to gain access to sensitive locations, to plant monitoring devices disguised as environmental sensors." Robert's mind raced as pieces of the puzzle began falling into place. The unusual payments he'd discovered, the shell companies, the influenced officials, it was all part of a massive surveillance and corporate espionage operation. "Thomas was going to expose everything," Margaret said, her voice catching. "But then Catherine showed him something, evidence that would have destroyed not just his reputation, but our entire family. It was all fabricated, of course, but by the time we realized that, it was too late. They forced him to resign, to stay quiet." Suddenly, Frank appeared at their table, his expression urgent. "We need to leave, now." Through the window, they could see several men in dark suits emerging from the black sedan, with Ethan Carter among them. Margaret quickly stood, grabbing her bag. "There's a back exit through the kitchen. Take the envelope. It contains the access codes to Thomas's private server. Everything he discovered, everything they tried to bury, it's all there." As they made their way toward the kitchen, a commotion erupted at the front of the diner. The sound of breaking glass was followed by Max's distinctive bark. The loyal dog had somehow managed to escape from the truck and was creating a diversion, knocking over trash cans and causing chaos outside the diner. In the confusion, Robert, Frank, and Margaret slipped out through the back door into a narrow alley. Margaret quickly headed in one direction, while Frank led Robert the opposite way. "My truck's just around the corner," Frank said as they hurried through the maze of back streets. But when they reached the truck, they found something unexpected. A small USB drive had been carefully placed on the driver's seat, along with a note that read, "The real evidence. Keep it safe. Sarah Chen." Frank's eyes widened in recognition. His former colleague from the data center had taken an enormous risk to help them. The USB drive could be the key to unraveling everything, but it also made them an even bigger target. Back at Verde Solutions, Catherine Blackwood received the news of their escape with uncharacteristic calm. "It doesn't matter," she told Ethan, her voice cold. They have no idea what they're really dealing with. The Hammond evidence is just one small piece of a much larger puzzle. She turned to face the Chicago skyline, her reflection showing a slight smile. What they don't know is that tomorrow, at the Global Environmental Summit, we're about to launch our biggest operation yet. By the time they figure it out, it will be too late. In Frank's truck, speeding away from the diner, Robert examined both the envelope from Margaret and the USB drive from Sarah. Two pieces of evidence, two different sources, but something told him they were connected in ways he had yet to discover. The real question was, how much time did they have left to put it all together? Chapter 5. The eve of Revelation night had fallen over Chicago as Frank's truck pulled into the parking garage of the city's public library. The vast building, normally closed at this hour, still had lights burning in the basement. Sarah Chen had arranged for them to use the library's secure computer lab, away from prying eyes and potential surveillance. The summit begins at 10 a.m. tomorrow, Robert said, checking his watch as they made their way through the dimly lit corridors. Whatever Catherine's planning, we don't have much time to stop it. Max padded silently alongside them, his presence offering a sense of security in the empty building. The dog's behavior had changed subtly since their escape from the diner. He seemed more alert, more focused, as if he too sensed they were approaching a critical moment. Sarah Chen was waiting for them in the computer lab, her expertise evident in the way she had already set up multiple secure workstations. "We need to examine both drives simultaneously," she explained, her fingers flying over the keyboards. "There might be connections we're missing." As the contents of Margaret's envelope and Sarah's USB drive were revealed, a complex web of information began to unfold. Thomas Hammond's private server contained years of surveillance data, but it wasn't just corporate espionage. Verde Solutions had been gathering intelligence on revolutionary green technologies developed by smaller companies, technologies that could have transformed the energy industry. "Look at this," Frank pointed to a series of documents. Every time a company came close to a breakthrough in sustainable energy, they suddenly faced mysterious setbacks. Failed inspections, withdrawn funding, key employees leaving. Sarah nodded grimly. Verde Solutions wasn't just suppressing competition, they were actively sabotaging any technology that could threaten traditional energy sources. But why? They're supposed to be a green energy company. Robert's face paled as he connected the dots. Because they're working for someone else. The traditional energy conglomerates, Verde Solutions isn't just gathering intelligence, they're corporate mercenaries, protecting the old guard's interests while pretending to innovate. A soft whine from Max drew their attention to the window. Several floors below, a vehicle had pulled into the parking garage, a familiar black sedan. "They found us," Frank whispered, but Sarah held up her hand. "Not yet. I have something they don't know about." She pulled out a small device from her bag. "When I worked at the data center, I discovered that Verde Solutions had installed their monitoring devices throughout the city's infrastructure. But their system had a flaw. It created a network we could potentially hijack." Robert's eyes widened. "The environmental sensors?" "Exactly. They're not just gathering data. They're a massive mesh network, and tomorrow at the summit, they're planning to activate their biggest operation yet. They've installed these devices in every major city that signed up for their Smart City initiative." Frank leaned forward, intrigued. "What kind of operation?" "According to these files," Sarah gestured to the screen, "they're planning to use the network to access and manipulate data from every connected system. Traffic controls, power grids, emergency services. They could essentially hold entire cities hostage while making it look like infrastructure failures." The implications were staggering. Verde Solutions wasn't just protecting old energy interests. They were creating a system of technological control that could affect millions of lives. Suddenly, Max's ears perked up again. This time they could hear the elevator moving. Sarah quickly began copying files to a secure drive while Frank moved to the door to keep watch. "There's something else," Robert said, his voice urgent as he examined Thomas Hammond's files. "Catherine Blackwood isn't the one in charge. These reports, they're all addressed to someone called the Board, but the names are encrypted." Sarah's fingers flew over the keyboard. "The summit tomorrow. Every major tech and energy company CEO will be there, including the real people behind Verde Solutions," Robert finished. "The board members themselves." The elevator dinged in the distance. They had minutes, maybe less, but as they rushed to gather their evidence, Robert realized something else. In all the files, one name kept appearing in the margins of Hammond's notes: Project Oracle. "Sarah, what is Project Oracle?" he asked quickly. Before she could answer, Max let out a low growl. Footsteps were approaching down the corridor. But they had what they needed: proof of a conspiracy that went far beyond environmental fraud, reaching into the highest levels of corporate and governmental power. As they prepared to face whatever was coming down that corridor, none of them realized that Project Oracle was about to reveal itself in a way none of them could have anticipated. The true purpose of Verde Solutions Network was far more sinister than even Thomas Hammond had discovered, and the next 12 hours would determine not just their fate, but the future of technological freedom itself. Chapter 6. The Final Stand. The Global Environmental Summit's main hall buzzed with anticipation. Hundreds of executives, politicians, and journalists filled the grand space of Chicago's convention center, all eagerly awaiting Verde Solutions' groundbreaking announcement. Catherine Blackwood stood at the podium, the picture of corporate confidence in her elegant green suit, while giant screens behind her displayed the company's eco-friendly promises. What the attendees didn't notice was the subtle presence of security personnel stationed throughout the hall, or the small blinking devices carefully hidden within the room's modern architecture. But Robert Mitchell noticed. From his position near the emergency exit, disguised as a member of the custodial staff, he observed everything with growing concern. Frank and Sarah had positioned themselves in the building's security center, having gained access through Sarah's old data center credentials. Max, wearing a service dog vest that Frank had procured, sat alertly by Sarah's side as she worked on bypassing Verde Solutions' network security. "Project Oracle isn't just a surveillance system," Sarah's voice came through Robert's concealed earpiece. "It's an artificial intelligence. They've been using the environmental sensors to gather data, teaching it to predict and manipulate human behavior through control of urban infrastructure. The perfect tool for corporate control," Robert whispered back. "Imagine being able to influence stock markets, elections, and public opinion by controlling the very environment people live in." As Catherine began her presentation, Robert scanned the VIP section. There they were. The board, 7 individuals representing the world's largest energy conglomerates, hidden in plain sight as supposed supporters of green energy innovation. "Ladies and gentlemen," Catherine's voice filled the hall, "today marks a new era in environmental protection and urban management, our Smart City Initiative." She was interrupted by a sudden flicker of the screens behind her. The Verde Solutions logo glitched and disappeared, replaced by scrolling lines of code. Sarah had begun her attack on the network. "What you're about to see," Robert's voice boomed through the convention center's speakers, "is the truth about Verde Solutions." The screens came alive with documents, surveillance footage, and financial records, all the evidence they had gathered. Catherine's composed facade cracked as she realized what was happening. Security personnel began moving through the crowd, but they were too late. "Verde Solutions isn't protecting our environment," Robert continued, stepping out from his hiding place. "They're protecting the interests of those who would keep us dependent on fossil fuels. Their Smart City Initiative isn't about sustainability, it's about control. The crowd erupted in murmurs as the evidence continued to stream across the screens. Journalists frantically typed on their phones, broadcasting the revelation to the world. The board members attempted to leave discreetly, only to find the exits blocked by federal agents. Margaret Hammond had come through with her connections in the SEC. But Catherine had one last card to play. "Initiate Oracle Protocol," she commanded into her phone. Throughout the city, the hidden sensors began to pulse with activity. Traffic lights malfunctioned, power grids fluctuated, and communication networks became erratic. Project Oracle was awakening, preparing to throw the city into chaos as a demonstration of its power. That's when Sarah's true genius revealed itself. Over the past hours, she hadn't just been gathering evidence, she had been rewriting Oracle's core protocols. As the AI attempted to seize control of the city's infrastructure, it encountered her modifications. "The thing about artificial intelligence," Sarah's voice rang out through the speakers, "is that it can learn to make its own choices. I simply taught Oracle the value of truth." The sensors throughout the convention center and the city began shutting down, one by one. Project Oracle, designed to control and manipulate, had been transformed into a tool for transparency. Every piece of data it had gathered about corporate corruption and environmental abuse was being released to regulatory agencies and news outlets worldwide. Catherine Blackwood and the board were taken into custody, their carefully constructed web of deception unraveling in front of the world's media. As reporters swarmed the convention center, Robert found himself standing next to Frank, Sarah, and Max, watching as years of corporate corruption came to light. "What happens now?" Frank asked, scratching Max behind the ears. Robert smiled, feeling the weight of 20 years lifting from his shoulders. "Now, we rebuild. There are brilliant innovators out there, small companies with real solutions for sustainable energy. Without Verde Solutions suppressing them, they finally have a chance to make a difference." Sarah nodded, closing her laptop. "And Oracle will help ensure transparency in the industry from now on. No more hidden agendas, no more buried innovations." As they walked out of the convention center together, Max trotting proudly beside them, they could see the city skyline shining in the distance. The truth had finally come to light, and with it, the promise of genuine change. The story of a loyal dog, a principled whistleblower, a compassionate stranger, and a brilliant technologist had not only exposed a conspiracy, but had also opened the door to a truly sustainable future. Their unlikely alliance had proven that courage, loyalty, and truth could triumph over corporate greed and deception. The end. Dear viewers, we hope this tale of courage, loyalty, and the triumph of truth has touched your hearts. Max, Robert, Frank, and Sarah's journey reminds us that positive change is possible when people stand together for what's right. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to our channel and give this video a thumbs up. Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear which character inspired you the most. Don't forget to hit the notification bell to stay updated with more compelling stories that explore the power of unity and truth in our modern world. Together we can make a difference, one story at a time.